Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. Today we're going to take a look at the 3-rail O-scale Union Pacific Veranda Turbine set from MTH. Okay, let's get things started with a little bit of history. You know, one of the things that makes the Union Pacific such a fun railroad to model is that they've pretty much had at least one of every American locomotive ever made. I mean, the rule of thumb is that if somebody made it, the Union Pacific at least tried it at some point in time. They've always been a very forward-thinking company, much more so than any other American railroad. They've always been very heavy into R&D, and they've never been afraid to experiment. And on top of that mentality is the fact that for much of the 20th century, the thought process over at UP was that bigger was better, and that led to the creation of some of the most gigantic, most famous locomotives in American railroading history, such as the Big Boys, the Challengers, the Verandas, and towards the end of that era, the DD-35s and the DD-40s. So when you take all that into consideration, it should come as no surprise that during the 1950s and 60s, the UP dabbled in gas turbine electric locomotives, which is where the Veranda comes into play. A gas turbine electric locomotive, or GTEL for short, is essentially a jet engine on wheels. They basically took an airplane engine and stuck it inside a locomotive and connected it up to a generator to produce the DC power for the trucks. And this had the major advantage of generating tremendous horsepower. However, it did come with a couple major disadvantages. The first disadvantage was that these things were very loud because, hey, it's a jet engine. On a lot of the diesels of the time, the crew would service the engine on the inside, but because these things were so loud, they had to build these decks on either side of the engine so that the crew could service the engine from the outside in. And so with these decks on either side, they got the nickname Veranda, because a veranda is another name for a deck or a porch. The other major disadvantage of the gas turbine electrics, and really the one that led to their eventual demise, was that they had a voracious appetite for fuel. In fact, that's why they eventually had to add the auxiliary fuel tenders, because the onboard fuel tanks, as big as they were, could not hold enough fuel to allow the crews to complete their runs without having to pull over for more gas. Now, when they first built the gas turbine electrics, they got around the fuel consumption issue by using a very cheap fuel type called Bunker C fuel. Bunker C fuel is literally the bottom of the barrel when it comes to fuel types. It's almost a waste product of the fuel distillation process. It's really dark and thick and has a consistency like molasses. In fact, it's so thick, they had to build heaters into the fuel tanks in order to heat the fuel to a point that would allow it to flow through the fuel lines of the engine. But as I said, it was very cheap, and that allowed the UP to operate the gas turbine electrics and still turn a profit. However, in later years, other industries began to find uses for Bunker C fuel, which caused the price to go up, which in turn made the gas turbine electrics more expensive to operate, and at that point they were no longer economically viable. So by the late 1960s, the gas turbine electrics were pretty much history. But hey, the cool thing about model railroading is that we don't have to worry about fuel prices. We can run whatever we want. Now let's go over some quick stats and facts on the MTH Veranda. MTH first offered this set in their 2011 Volume 1 catalog, and then it finally shipped in mid-2013. Now, the length of the engine itself is 21 inches. The length of the additional tender is 9.5 inches, so that gives us a total length of 30.5 inches. The weight of the engine is 7 pounds 6 ounces. The weight of the tender is 3 pounds 3 ounces, so that gives us a total weight of 10 pounds 9 ounces. The pulling power of this engine, as you might expect with 4 motors, is pretty good. It comes in right at 3 pounds 6 ounces, and the minimum curve needed to operate this engine is 0.72. On the inside, the Veranda is powered by 4 flywheel motors. That's why it has such great pulling power. Every axle on every truck is powered. You've also got the electronics for the MTH ProtoSound 3.0 command package. There are 2 operating smoke units on the Veranda, and all the lights are LEDs. There are 2 ways to operate this model. The preferred way is to use MTH's Digital Command System, or DCS, as that will give you access to all of the engine's advanced features. However, you can also run this set conventionally with just a transformer and some track. Now, because this is a Protosound 3 equipped engine, it does come with a DCC decoder on board. However, since this model is not meant to be run as a two-rail model, you're really not going to have much use for that. So that takes care of the stats. Now let's go in for a closer look at the engine, the fuel tender, and the additional pieces of rolling stock. Here's a look at the pilot, and being a three-rail model, it does have the pilot separate from the body, and that's to allow the engine to negotiate the tighter curves that are typically associated with three-rail O-scale modeling. Now, speaking of curves, a minute ago I said that the minimum curve needed to run this engine was 0.72. Well, I meant it. Sometimes these engines will come with a soft recommendation where they say 0.72, but you might be able to get away with 0.63 or 0.54. But in this case, it really is a hard 0.72. You cannot run this thing on anything less than 0.72. So for those of you guys who don't have at least 0.72 curves on your layout, I'm sorry, you're just not going to be able to run this thing. But anyway, getting back to the pilot, we've got some nice detailing. There are some separately applied details over here, as well as over here. We've got a little air hose, and then of course we've got the proto-coupler that can be thrown from the DCS remote. The truck side frames have nice cast-in details, as well as some separately applied details, including these add-on ladders on the inner set of trucks. If we take a look at the gap between the trucks and the body of the engine, at first glance you may think, wow, that's a big gap, especially since this is a three-rail model, and in three-rail sometimes that gap can get a little big. But actually, if you take a look at photos of the prototype, there actually was a pretty big gap between the trucks and the body of the engine. So I don't know if it was this big, but it was pretty big, so this isn't that far off the mark. Moving up on the front of the engine, we've got the nice UP logo right here, a cast-in door with separately applied grab irons on either side. We've got a couple of operating headlights right here and an operating Mars light above that. On either side, we've got lighted number boards as well as operating marker lights. Up here, we've got a number of separately applied details, including grab irons, windshield wipers, and these two horn pieces up here. On the inside of the cab, there are two hand-painted crew figures and some minimal detailing, which is okay because you can barely see in there anyway. The interior of the cab is lighted. However, like most new MTH Premier Line engines, that light does shut off when the engine starts moving. If we move around, we get a look at the side of the cab. We've got some nice cast-in details down here. The windows on the side of the cab don't open, but they still look pretty good nonetheless. Now we come to the cool veranda decks on the engine, which again is where it got its nickname. So I'll just roll it on by so that you can see everything. Most of the details on these sides of the engine are cast in, but they did a great job. So overall it looks fantastic. And if we take a look at the other side, you can see it looks great over here as well. Moving past the veranda, we've got the back corner of the engine, which has the big UP Shield logo and a little plastic window right here, and there's one on the other side as well. On the back of the engine, we've got a separately applied metal ladder right here, another cast-in door with separately applied metal grab irons on either side. There's an operating backup light right here, and then down here we've got a metal handrail, safety chain, and brake wheel, and we've also got some nice step detail down here as well. This is the rear protocoupler that can be fired from the DCS remote. However, it should be noted that the presence or absence of the auxiliary fuel tender determines whether or not this coupler actually functions. There is an electrical socket right here, and that accepts the electrical tether from the fuel tender. If you run the engine without the fuel tender, this becomes the default rear coupler, and when you activate the rear coupler on the DCS remote, that's the coupler that fires. If you connect the fuel tender and you connect the electrical tether, then this coupler is deactivated, the coupler on the back of the tender is activated, and that becomes the rear coupler, and then when you activate the rear coupler on the DCS remote, the coupler on the back of the tender is what fires, and not this one. Now let's take a look at the top of the veranda. I already talked about the horn earlier. We've got another add-on piece behind that, and some metal grab irons. And then we've got some nice cast-in details back here, as well as another separately applied piece right there. Moving back, we get to the smokestack, which contains one of the two operating smoke units on this model. And at this point, I'm going to stop for a few minutes and elaborate about this smoke unit, because the front smoke unit is the source of a significant yet easily fixable problem that has surfaced with these verandas. Let me start off by explaining how the smoke setup is supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work is that when you want to put smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you remove this plug and pour the smoke fluid down this hole. That goes directly into the smoke unit, and then you put the plug back on the hole, and when the smoke unit is in operation, it puts the smoke out of this exhaust structure right here. That's the way it's supposed to work, but that's not the way it worked when I took this engine out of the box, and most likely that's not the way it's going to work when you take yours out of the box. When I first got this engine, this little plug piece was missing, and the engine was also missing a couple of internal parts that you can't see right now. So when I started the engine up, all of the smoke was coming out of this hole, and nothing was coming out over here. Now, to be honest, it took me about a week to realize that something was wrong because I'm not an expert on the veranda, and so I turned the engine on and saw there was smoke coming out, and I really didn't think anything more about it. I didn't consider whether or not the smoke was coming out of the right hole, because really, how often does that happen? It wasn't till I started to prepare for this review video that I realized that something was not right, because when I looked in the catalog, the illustration showed the smoke coming out of here and not here. So I figured, well, either something's wrong with the catalog or something's wrong with my model. So I went on to the OGR forum and I did a little research, and other people were having the same problem. And it turned out that it was simply a mistake that MTH made when they were assembling these engines at the factory. And I continued to read on, and it said that MTH was aware of the problem and they also had a fix for it. So I gave MTH a call and they said, yes, we are aware of the issue and we have a kit that will fix the problem. They said, we can either send the kit directly to you and you can do the installation yourself, it's very easy, or you can send the engine to us and we will fix it for you free of charge, or you can take the engine to an authorized MTH repair center and they will fix it for you free of charge. So being like a lot of guys in the hobby, I like to work on my engines myself, so I had them send me the kit. It arrived about a week later and I installed it. It took about 5 or 10 minutes to install. And ever since then, the smoke unit has worked perfectly. The smoke is no longer coming out of this hole. It's now coming out of this structure as it should. So the problem is not that anything's broken or defective. What's going on here is a simple case of missing parts. And the parts that are missing are the ones that channel the smoke from the smoke unit over here to the exhaust stack. So the repair kit that MTH makes contains the missing parts. There are 4 parts in the kit. It's very simple. The first part is a black funnel tray assembly that goes underneath here, and it channels the smoke from the smoke unit over to the exhaust stack. The second part is a screw that holds the tray in place. The third part is a metal O-ring adapter that allows the tray to connect to the smoke unit. And then the final 4th part is this little piece that plugs up the smoke unit fill hole. And that's all there is to it. Now, I did have to open up the engine to install the missing part, so I'm not going to replicate that right now. But I did take a picture and you can kind of see what it looked like when I installed the missing parts. And if I remove the smokestack for a second, you can kind of see the end result. Here's that black tray assembly that was missing, and this is what channels the smoke from the smoke unit down here over to the exhaust stack, and that was one of the critical parts that was missing. So like I said, the installation of the kit was very easy and it completely fixes the problem. So if you're considering buying this model, I would not let this deter you in any way, because this is a great set and this is just a very simple problem with a very simple fix. If you do order one of these sets, just make sure that the dealer sends you the installation kit, or you can ask the dealer to install the kit for you. Now, the dealer that I bought this set from, which is the Train Loft in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, they now have the kits in stock, so if you buy the set from them, they will go ahead and send that kit with the set. Just make sure you remind them. Now, I know that there are always some people out there that get bent out of shape about these things, and I've never understood that because mistakes happen. These things are not built by robots. They're designed, built, and inspected by human beings, and human beings make mistakes. That's life. And my philosophy on the whole thing, and not just with model trains, but on life in general, is that mistakes happen. What's important to me is not the mistake, but how the mistake is handled. And that's regardless of whether it's model trains or eating in a restaurant or a car that has a recall that I have to deal with. I'm not worried about the mistake. I'm worried about how they handle the mistake. Did they make an effort to do the right thing and make things better? MTH handled this mistake in the right way. So for me, this is really a non-issue, and I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Anyway, moving past the first smokestack, we've got a see-through metal screen right here, and then we've got a whole bunch of nice cast-in and separately applied details, and then another see-through screen back here. Toward the back, we've got another smokestack which contains the second of the two operating smoke units on this model. Now, on the prototype, this smokestack was the exhaust for the auxiliary 250 horsepower diesel engine that sat in the back of the Veranda. Now, that little engine was used to bring the systems on the Veranda online before engaging the turbine, and it was also used to move the Verandas around yards and terminals without engaging the turbine. Now, unlike the front smoke unit, which has a separate fill hole, this smoke unit works like most other smoke units in the hobby, and to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you just pour the fluid directly down the stack. Here's a look at the underside of the Veranda. As I said before, all of the axles are driven, and you've got 2 traction tires per truck for a total of 8 traction tires. So when you put together the 8 traction tires with the fact that all of the axles are driven and you've got 4 motors, that's why this thing has such great pulling power. There are 4 pickup rollers, 1 per truck. The speaker for the sound system is right here, and then on the floor of the engine you've got the master controls for volume and smoke and so forth. Okay, that takes care of the engine. Now let's take a look at the auxiliary fuel tender. The fuel tender features all metal construction, so the body, the trucks, the couplers, and all of the decorations are metal. So that gives the tender a nice weight and a really good feel to it. On the sides of the tender, the side frames on the trucks are nicely detailed. We've got the crisp Union Pacific logo on both sides. We've got some nice little add-on details down here and some nice rivet detailing. And then we've got some nice step detail on both ends. The front of the tender looks really nice. As I said, all of the detailing is metal. So the ladders, the brake wheel, the coupler cut bar, and the piping, all metal. There's a dummy O-gauge coupler right here that connects up to the engine. And then, as I mentioned earlier, here's that electrical tether that connects the tender to the engine. When it comes time to connect the tender to the engine, what you do is you grab the tether cable and connect it to the engine, like that, and then connect the couplers, like that. Here's a look at the back of the tender. Again, all of the detail parts are metal. There's an operating backup light right here, and an operating proto-coupler that can be thrown from the DCS remote right here. And as I said earlier, when you connect the tender to the engine with the tether cable, this becomes the rear coupler on the engine, and this backup light activates when the engine goes into reverse. If we take a look at the top of the tender, it's pretty Spartan, but it still looks good. We've got nice cast-in detailing on the walkways. There's a little separately applied hatch piece right here. And just like the rest of the tender, everything up here is made of metal. Here's a look at the underside of the tender. There's really not much to see here because there are no pickup rollers on the trucks. There's no speaker. There are no electronics inside the tender other than the wires needed to run the coupler and the backup light. But I did want to show it to you anyway just to clear up any confusion. Okay, now we're going to take a quick look at the rolling stock that comes with this set. There are 5 pieces of rolling stock, 4 boxcars and 1 caboose, so we'll take a look at one of the boxcars first. This is an MTH Premier Line scale 50-foot double-door boxcar. It's not a new model, they've been making these for a while, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is a very nice, high-quality piece of rolling stock. That's the nice thing about MTH. When they sell you a set, they don't cheapen the rolling stock. They give you the same high-quality pieces of Premier Line rolling stock that they sell on an individual basis. But what makes it even better is the deal that you get when you buy the set. If you were to buy one of these boxcars on its own, it would cost you $50 or $60. But since you're buying it with the set, you're only paying $20 for each of these 5 pieces of rolling stock. That is a fantastic deal. So, this boxcar has everything you would expect out of an MTH Premier Line piece of rolling stock. It's got die-cast sprung trucks and couplers, nice underframe detailing, the doors on both sides open up, you've got the brake wheel on one end, and some nice add-on details as well, the durable ABS plastic body, and the minimum curve needed to run this boxcar is 0.31. It's the same story with the caboose. This is an extended vision caboose, and it's typical MTH, very high quality. So you've got die-cast metal trucks and couplers, nice underframe detailing, lots of add-on parts like these little grab irons. On the inside, you've got a decorated and lighted interior, and there's even a hand-painted crew figure up in the cupola. The minimum curve needed to operate this caboose is 031. Alright, the last thing we're going to do before we start this thing up is BFIMO, best feature in my opinion. Well, in my opinion, the best feature of the Veranda is its raw power. As I said before, this thing has 4 motors in it, which is awesome. This is a beast of an engine, and it'll pull pretty much anything you want. And what's even better is that MTH really didn't have to do it that way. They could have just put 2 motors in this model, and I don't think anybody would be complaining. So the fact that they took the extra step of putting 4 motors in this model is really cool. And on top of that, not only does it have 4 motors, but they're still selling it at a great price. But I'll talk more about the price after we run the engine. So in my opinion, the best feature is the raw power of 4 motors. Okay, now comes the fun part of this presentation. We're going to go ahead and start the engine up, listen to some of the sounds, and then take it for a spin. I'm going to start the engine up using the extended startup sequence on the MTH DCS remote. That is the soft key labeled SSU. So let's give it a try.
If fueling her up now.
Okay, as you can hear, it's very loud, but it should be because, as I said, the Veranda was basically a jet engine on wheels. I mean, I'm here in my basement with a model of the Veranda, and I'm basically having to shout into the microphone because this thing is so darn loud. But that's the way these things were. In fact, the Verandas were actually banned in some towns in California because they were so incredibly loud. Anyway, let's give a listen to the horn. Now here's the bell. Okay, now I want to play some of the crew talk sounds for you. However, the sound of the engine is so loud that you may not be able to hear the crew talk sounds very well over the sound of the engine. So what I'm going to do is turn down the sound of the engine, and that will help bring out the sound of the crew talk. Okay, I've got the sound of the engine down a bit, so now I'll play some of the crew talk sounds. And again, I know some of you don't like crew talk sounds. That's okay, you don't have to use them if you don't want to. Okay, so that was a few of the crew talk sounds. Now there are more of them available, but I'm not going to play all of them right now. You will, however, hear more of them in a few minutes when I do the passenger freight announcement sequence. So now I'm going to turn the engine sounds back up and then we'll roll it out. Okay, let's go ahead and roll it out. Okay, now I'm going to trigger the passenger freight announcement sequence.
Dispatcher, position enters the yard. Number one track. That's the runway for now. Okay, guys, I've got the switch list. We have to switch number 4, 6, and 7 tracks and build the train to number 1 track. Hey, it looks like I'll need an extra lantern battery. I'll get one on my way down and make the first cut. Make the cut behind a 34th car on number 4 track. Roger that. 34th car on number 4 track. I'm trailing her up. Roger that. Dispatcher.
Okay, that about wraps it up for this review. This is a great engine and a great set, and what makes it even better is the price. The retail price on this set is right at $1,000, which is fantastic. When it comes to getting the most train for your money, you can't beat MTH. If this was a Lionel set, for example, with a 4-motored engine, a die-cast tender, and 5 pieces of rolling stock, I'm willing to bet it would probably be in the $1,200 range or more. So the fact that MTH sells this thing for $1,000 is awesome. Now, over the years, I've learned to never buy the MTH engine by itself and to always buy the set, because typically what MTH does is they will sell the engine by itself, and then for $100 more, they will sell the set that has the additional pieces of rolling stock. And this is a perfect example. The Veranda by itself is about $900, but for $100 more, for $1,000, you get the Veranda and the 5 pieces of rolling stock. At that price, they're practically giving the rolling stock away. $100 for 5 pieces, that's a great deal. You can't beat that anywhere. Now, if you're interested in purchasing one of these, I would recommend getting one from today's sponsor, which is the Train Loft in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You can call them at 336-760-9817 or find them on the web at www.trainloft.com. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time. To discuss this or any other O-Gauge train and to meet other O-Gauge modelers, visit the O-Gauge Railroading Magazine online forum at ogrforum.ogaugerr.com.